This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. Phil, is your machine on?
Machine's on.
How long has it been on?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Long enough.
We'll start it right where I said, is it on?
Great.
I'm holding my hands right here. Who's the kid a kid sent this in? I call him a kid. Yeah, he's like Seth's age. I don't know. Called a Musky Manifesto, Observer number 5, September 18th, 2023.
The Musky dossier.
A lot of mail comes in. I don't know how this email got sent to me, but I had it printed off, which makes it seem more thing. It's from a kid. It's a manifesto full of photos and everything, and it has to do with one of my favorite pet peeves, which is the latest, the new craze of like the new Musky Craze, like Musky 2.0.
This is something that you've made up.
No.
Yes.
As I was just saying before Phil turned the machine on, my maternal grandfather was a muskie fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back then, you just went fishing muskies. Now it's this whole thing of like, they treat them like they're like, people treat them like they're like pets. They got all these strains, they turn them out. There's like, they're like, it's rod and reel guys that have gotten as persnickety as catch and release trout anglers.
Well,
they're all supposedly super interested in the well-being of the fish, but not so interesting that you wouldn't try to jab a big hook in its lip.
Right. A lot of the recent enthusiasm comes from the fly fishing crowd.
No.
Yes.
For muskies?
Muskies, yes.
Maybe. It's
totally.
Like, the fish of you cast out a big lure, you get close, you do the figure 8.
They do that with a fly rod.
You get mad if someone is mean to one.
All I can say is if your new timeline is my entire life.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is
which
like
it may be.
the
Which
last
it may
25 years.
Yeah,
no,
25.
This is an example of this is something I just came into my universe, and now I'm interested in it, and so it's Musky 2.0.
In geologic time.
This whole thing of like, oh, did you hear that in Dickerson Lake they released the quad 4 strain? 3 quad 4 strains?
Oh, I don't know about this. Me neither.
I'm making up the words. And I guarantee there's a Dickerson Lake, though.
Brandon, are you aware of
the
Musky 2.0?
Musky 2.0.
When was Musky 1.0? I've caught one.
The old days.
40s.
My
and
maternal
50s.
grandfather.
And then there was a hiatus from.
Then there was a break, and then it was just like fishing, and then all of a sudden it became like that the catch and release, the really precious, persnickety, mean-spirited catch and release school of thought got moved away from brown trout and laid upon the muskie.
Interesting. And now brown trout are being given a break.
Are they, Cal? People are still mean to you if you're mean to a brown trout?
Oh, yeah. And
Okay.
I guess there's a lot of topwater action. There's some similar baits, just similar sizing. Folks going nighttime activities, all that stuff, going after both species.
Fish of 1,000 casts.
I caught
10,000.
10,000.
Muskie Chet caught some muskies.
Caught one muskie in my life by
Tiger
accident.
muskie or muskie?
No, muskie.
What strain?
I didn't ask it.
Were you mean to it, or did you turn it right out?
It strained the line.
That's good.
I turned it loose. We took one photo. I was fishing a little spinner bait. Thought I might pick up a walleye in a little lake in Wisconsin, and thought I had a log. Wasn't a log. Fought it for about 25 minutes, and my dad got it in a net. We were in a little John boat we'd rented for $25 on this lake in Wisconsin. We just thought we were going to mess around. And we were messing around. Didn't think we'd catch a muskie. And my picture's still on the wall of that place.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
How big was it?
I I don't know, 45 inches. We didn't have a scale. We didn't have a ruler. It was a nice fish.
The angler you're hearing from is Brendan Runde, here from North Carolina. He's a marine scientist. What did I say wrong?
His last name.
No,
Okay.
Runde.
He
Runde?
took me
Oh,
aside.
I'm sorry.
Took me aside.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
stand corrected. I will keep
Think
my mouth
Run
shut.
DMC.
That's right. And that's my uncle, actually.
Oh, nice. Really? Come on. So now I'm real dubious about this supposed fish he's got on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
He's a marine scientist with the Nature Conservancy. And he's not going to put it this way, but he's here to talk about what I suspect to be a little bit of a deal with the devil on alternative energy.
Definitely not how I'm going to put it.
No.
Not
a deal with the
party
devil,
line.
but a fatal compromise.
Oh.
A fatal compromise.
We need a dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. But I don't want to lose sight of the Musky manifesto. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. So this kid and his dad and his grandpa are out fishing muskies, muskalunges, and they catch a whopper. They catch the world record muskie by a good stretch.
Well, let's hear how good of a stretch. You got to have details if you're talking world record, man.
They catch it. This kid that wrote in is observer number 5. Okay.
Out of some undetermined number of observers.
Okay. He even tells us the Linnean name.
Esox masquiningi.
72-pound muskie. Whew. All kinds of witnesses. They weigh it. They put it on a thing. They manhandle it.
Mm-hmm. They're mean to it.
They rub all the slime off.
Rub the slime off it. Turn it loose. They go and they tell a guy. They go and tell a guy at the dock about it. And the guy says, man, the muskie community, I wouldn't even put it out there because the muskie community will come after you. Anyways, the IGFA kicks them off because they weighed the fish on a boat.
A lot of technicalities with the IGFA.
The muskie has to be weighed on dry land.
Huh.
So you have to kill the fish, basically.
Apparently.
How are you going to pull that off with that size of
72
fish
pounder.
in a regular old boat?
You have that cradle,
Yeah.
and then you like nurse the thing all the way to shore.
He's got all these photos.
Which-
He's got all of his evidence. But
More
here's the problem.
stress, more stress, more stress.
Here's the fish here. But one thing he gets into is it probably weighed more.
Of course.
Because they had to certify their scale after the fact. The scale they certified after the fact was dead on balls at 50. But a 75-pound weight, when they certified their scale, a 75-pound weight rang in at 72.50. 72.5. Kicked off, and this is his story, kicked off because they didn't weigh it on land. Then he gets into a bunch of other really big muskie that have been disqualified for all kinds of reasons.
Is our consensus for that rule is like, since you aren't on a solid ground, that
the boat sinks a little bit into the water?
the certified scale isn't as accurate? That's the reason?
I don't know. But he's pointing out, imagine if you'd killed that fish, what you would have heard about from the walleye, from the muskie community, which apparently is muskie 2.0.
But if you'd have killed it 50 years ago, nobody would have cared.
Wouldn't have said nothing. Now it's catched. Now it's like, what are you supposed to
Muskie
do?
2.0.
Well, just think about all the
Catch, it's 2.0.
chipmunks
It's a
and
2.0
walleye and panfish that you would save by killing that fish.
It's a 2.0 catch 22.
Yep.
In the old days, we'd have named this podcast that. 2.0 catch 22.
Those were
That'd have been-
Tidal Days 1.0. Now it's Tidal Days 2.0.
What was your comment, Jani?
Just think about all the chipmunks and smallmouth and panfish that they would have saved by killing that fish.
Save a
Yeah.
perch, kill a muskie.
Don't forget
Yeah.
ducklings.
Ducklings.
Yeah, little kid toes, stuff like that. There's that dude up in Canada 3 years ago that got smashed by a walleye in BC, tore his hand all up.
Walleye or muskie?
Or sorry, a muskie. Yeah, muskie.
Ouch.
Jeez.
Yeah. Those walleye anglers just really perked up. They're like, see, we knew that fish was badass.
We knew it wasn't real lazy.
It's not just for eating.
So anyways, buddy, I hear you, man. You got boned. Your grandpa got boned by the IGFA.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
I don't know what more to say about it.
What do you want the IGFA to do about it, though?
I don't know.
Like,
send the guy something.
Nah.
Consolation lure.
Got to weigh it on land. It's a catch-22. What are you supposed to do?
Rules
You
are
kill it.
rules.
Rules is rules. You kill it, and you're going to hear about it from the Musky community 2.0. You don't kill it, you can't be in the thing.
Would you kill it?
Yeah. I'd have made a video about it.
He'd have cut it into steaks.
I'd have got out my spearfishing knife right in the top of the head.
That'd do it.
I'd have been like, suck it, Musky community.
For context, I'd like to understand catch 21 and catch 23.
That's a
We
good
should
point.
come up with those.
It's a real catch-23.
Catch 23 exists.
Really?
It's Michael Jordan's fishing boat.
We've had a trivia
that's
question
right.
about that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Never gets off.
It's not a
is
musky
the word
boat,
on the
though.
street.
When are people hearing this, Corinne?
1st of April.
Oh, hey, go check out. So we got our live tour coming up. Let me pull up the dates. We got our live tour coming up. Just to remind everybody, where's my little thing?
April, what is it, 22nd or 23rd to May 5th?
April 23rd, Mesa, Arizona. Bear with me here. April 24, San Diego, California. April 25, Anaheim, California. April 27, Sacramento, California. That winds up being a lot of California. April 29, Salt Lake City. April 30, Boise, Idaho. May 1, Missoula, Montana, which is going to be a riot.
Hometown crowd.
Having spent many a night in that theater, above it, and in it, and below it.
With your elevator operator, buddy.
Man, we used to catch pigeons below that thing. Scootin' Newton. I'm going to tell the story of Scootin' Newton. May 2nd, Spokane. May 4, Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, and Slow Gin Fizz. If that ain't love, then tell me what is.
Great tune.
Uh-huh.
God, you know it's a winner when Phil laughs.
I know, which is about once a year, dude. Oh, something tickled Phil's fancy the other day. What was it?
It was something Randall said. I don't
Yeah,
know.
the other day something caught Phil's ear.
That was just a great Loretta Lynn impression. I like
That
it.
was great.
May 5, Tacoma. Get your tickets. You can go to the MeatEater.com and you'll find a live events thing and find it there. Or you can go to the specific theaters, but I didn't just name the specific theaters, which makes it very tricky. Type in, go to your computer and type in MeatEater Live. You'll find it. Come check us out. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's a 3-act show. Bring your wife.
You know, this is a little in the weeds, but when we talk about reaching new audiences with the podcast, there's got to be like a Venn diagram of when Phil laughs, we're reaching new audience members.
I don't know if those people will be around for a while, but they might pop in, see what's going on.
Like, you'd have to just catch one of them to have me walking by someone playing it. Like, you left your car door open at the gas station and you left it on, and some guy like Phil caught a little lick there. All right, Jani, hit it. Quick hit.
If the live tour isn't enough for you, you can come spend.
If that's not enough Jani for you,
3 days with us in a new thing we're calling MeatEater Experiences. We're gonna have a lot more details to come, but I've been instructed to do a quick hit here about this. We're hosting a fishing trip in Venice, Louisiana, as well as
can I get some background on that one?
Waterfowl hunt in Kansas. You want some background on the Venice?
I'd like to give some background.
Oh yeah, please do.
Last couple of years when we've been going down spearfishing the oil rigs out of coastal Louisiana, and I fell into becoming friends with Renee, who owns Cypress Cove Marina. And we got to talking about something fun we'd like to do. And we're going to we're going to take over Cypress Cove Marina.
Yep.
So we're doing a thing where he's got a houseboat, condos, a hotel. We're getting all the spots. He's got a whole ton of charter captains that charter out of his marina and friends and stuff. So we're getting all the boats, all the lodging put together, food plan, and then we're going to have MeatEater crew guys there, and we're doing big fishing party.
Guys and gals,
big fishing party, inshore, offshore, on guide boats, hanging out at night, cooking fish, cleaning fish.
It's going to be a good time. Renee is going to do, once per group, is going to do a big Cajun seafood boil, which I'm very excited about. I like people that are so into doing their type of food that when you meet someone that has custom made or had someone custom made them the thing to cook their food in, it's serious and it's going to be good. So we're going to get that experience down there. And then, waterfowl hunting in Kansas, 3 different trips between November, December, and January 1st really is the last one for that hunt. So go to the website. There'll be a drop-down menu under MeatEater Experiences, and all the details will be there here shortly.
You know what I like about the waterfowl part of it is that's going to be the thing I need to motivate me to finally get me a power plucker. And I'm going to have my power plucker sent there. Then when it's all said and done, I'm going to bring that power plucker back home.
It's a good idea.
What's that kind of power plucker I want?
The one that my brother-in-law has now.
Yeah.
I think it's called the fowl plucker, isn't it?
Dude, you ever be on that guy's website?
No.
I got the nosing around in there, and my neighbor Pottery Pat, he offered to go halvesies on it with me, but I don't know if I want to
You want to share?
Well, hey, and then whatever. Then I got to go looking for it over his house. So
I mean, you guys live like 50 yards apart. It's not like sharing.
I
It's
know
a big deal.
me and Pottery Pat already share everything anyway.
I've told you where I've seen these things set up. Eventually, there's a shack that gets built around them.
Cal was saying because the feather management's so much, you eventually just you kind of dig it out.
Yeah, you're like, boy, it doesn't really work in the garage all the time.
That's a creeping cost. If you start out with a power plucker and then you end up with a building.
And then you have a house that's built around. Well, yeah, exactly.
I think it could be modified a little bit. They're not cheap. I'm looking at it right now on the Orvis site. They're $730. I don't know what they get for them, but it makes a pretty duck when you do it right.
You read that guy is so serious. People place an order with that guy. And also, like, you go place the order, all of a sudden your phone rings. He's calling you.
To make sure that you're serious about this purchase?
To be like, well, I saw you bought one of the pluckers. Here's the deal. Right?
Yeah.
Let's work together.
Cal, I could see that there could be some feather buildup, I mean, especially if you're processing,
a lot.
50 a day. But, I mean, we processed almost 20 birds. And we've basically filled up a full canister shot back in that 2-hour period, and it was full. Like, you couldn't really done too many more without dumping it, but it worked.
You said 2 hours for 20 birds?
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing. I mean, we had kids there that are helping and messing around, but I mean, yeah. The key is it's got to be a dry bird.
Well, you got to read more. I started reading more than you read.
Yeah, I'd just send that guy a picture of my thumb. Say, like, is it going to do better than this?
Well, it might not do better, but it'll do faster. That's 100% sure.
Repetition, buddy.
I want one of those things still, man. I'm gonna have it sent there. So when we're doing our MeatEater Experiences deal, people can power pluck.
Totally. Go home with a bunch of birds, hopefully.
You got more to say?
No, I think that's good for.
Well, I'll tell you where you left off.
Quick hit.
Spots are available to the general public starting the opening day of bear season.
And turkey season.
In Pennsylvania?
April 15th. Isn't that, what's tax day?
Yep, that's it.
Oh, okay. So when you go to either send your money in or file for your money.
Who was it that had a horse named Iris because she was born on April 15th? You remember remember that?
No.
I thought that was a cute.
IRS.
Yeah.
April 15th spots are available. Again, we got our trip fishing Louisiana, inshore, offshore. You can even go jugging catfish.
Yeah, listen, man, I would have gone way deeper, but I was asked to do a quick hit. But yeah, we got all kinds of things we can talk about for this trip.
Or ducks and geese in Kansas.
Yeah.
And every night there's going to be we're going to give a long lecture about something.
That remains.
I'm going to read this every night. I'm going to read this musky manifesto to everybody present.
That's right. And that's optional. If you don't want to stay for that, you can just go get some rest because the next day is going to be another big day of hunting or fishing. So
there's a thing we spent a lot of time on, something blowing up out of, blowing up. That might be overselling it. A problem in Wisconsin that is just disconcerting to me. Unbeknownst to me for my whole life, I had no idea. You can't spear a northern pike in Wisconsin, which to me seems like the pike spear. If you'd have said to me, before I found this out, if you said to me, what is the pike spearingest state in America? I would have just said, Wisconsin.
Is it because of Musky 2.0? Is that what they don't want?
That's who's driving it right now. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought.
I don't know who was driving it prior to Musky 2.0. You cannot spear a northern pike in Wisconsin. You can spear a sturgeon in Wisconsin. Can't spear a northern pike. Why? Because they can't trust. One, they think pike spearers will get all the big ones. And they think that a pike spearer cannot tell the difference between a Northie and a muskellunge.
Man, it's like looking into a aquarium at the zoo.
You can trust Americans. You can trust Americans to tell the difference between a button buck and a spike. You can trust Americans to tell if a deer has 3 tines on one side. You can trust an American to tell a hen pintail from a drake pintail in the early season when they don't have their breeding plumage. You can tell Americans how to tell a hen pheasant from a rooster pheasant. You can trust Americans how to catch a pike and not mistakenly, or catch a muskie and not mistake it for a pike. What else can you trust Americans to do?
I think fast moving waterfowl is a fantastic example for sure.
You brought up hen versus rooster pheasant. How about a sharptail and a hen pheasant when they get up into the sun?
You can trust an American to tell the difference between a sharptail hen and a hen pheasant. 2 drab-colored brown birds with a pointy tail.
In the sun.
In the bright sun. There's no prohibition on hunting them in the bright sun.
Far from it.
No prohibition against walking into the sun. What else can you trust Americans?
Nothing.
You can trust men's room from the women's room.
You can trust Americans to tell the men's. Well, you used to.
Yeah.
You can trust Americans to not shoot a black bear sow with cubs. You can trust Americans to identify a male mountain goat. But apparently you cannot trust Americans to not spear muskies while spearing pike. Therefore, the entire state of Wisconsin can't go pike spearing. As we explained in a past episode, they put it to... Wisconsin has this kind of cool but widely celebrated and widely despised way that you can get game laws changed. What's it called, Cal? Do you remember? The advisory panel?
Oh, yeah, the regional, like Pat Durkin's always talking about, and Doug. Yeah, regional advisor, there's an acronym, but it's a county by county or region by region Citizens Advisory Council.
So if you want to get a game law in Wisconsin changed, you can bring it to the Citizens Advisory Panel. Like, I'm going to get in there heavy duty as a non-resident because they're trying to move through the Citizens Advisory Panel process. They're trying to move youth turkey in Wisconsin from 2 days to 4 days, which I firmly support. And the Wisconsin public supports that. What the Wisconsin public is uneasy about is youth deer going from 2 days to 4 days, but they're supportive of it going 4 days for turkey.
There's a lot of people that gripe about those youth hunting seasons. I don't understand.
Well, if I didn't have kids, I'd hate them.
Well,
I was saying the other day, if we had a youth elk, I was saying I would have never gotten the vasectomy. I said that on the show.
as a man with no children here in Gallatin County,
Here we go.
I pay out the nose for your kids' education already. I don't know why they also need to beat me out into the field.
Well, you know what, Cal?
I mean, pick one or the other. How's that?
You've had plenty of opportunity at this point in your life. Those kids need a little opportunity too.
Okay, help me out here. Let me put my glasses on.
Whoa.
I gotta put my glasses on. Who can help me out finding this? Well, how did the vote break? So they put it to the Citizens Advisory Panel and it got shot down, kind of. They said, do you support pike spearing? And how in the world could someone say no? But here's what happened. They had a nearly even vote of yes, no, and you had the option to say no opinion. Okay? Which was so close that it actually advanced to the Conservation Congress. The Conservation Congress in Wisconsin, after a somewhat anemic public input, meaning evenly broke yes, no. I think it was slightly no, but then there's all these people that copped out with a no opinion. So then it goes to the Conservation Congress, and the Conservation Congress in Wisconsin says 35 to 28, yes, we want a pike spearing season. But, as this guy puts it, the DNR in Wisconsin's now dragging their feet. This guy that writes in about it wrote this letter. Myself and the 2,000 other individuals I represent as part of the Wisconsin Dark House Angling Association and the Powerful Fish Decoy Association.
National.
The Powerful National Fish Decoy Association are going to continue the fight. So it's like it's a pot boiler in Wisconsin.
Well, yeah. I mean, what is the risk? Like, are you aware of any long studies that examine the abuse of overtake by spear fishermen during the ice season? Like a guy committed to a fish shack versus 6 tip-ups.
Yeah, like that's what I was gonna say. Like I've speared pike, and you're not out fishing the guy who's got a whole set of tip-ups out. Like no way.
Yeah.
You know? And you're sitting there, and like yeah, maybe you're targeting bigger pike, but
I'm not aware of any studies, and I could see an argument for going to lake by lake management.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course.
Depending on, the population status of muskies or the presence even of muskies in a given lake.
Yeah, that'd be a great compromise. Of course. If there's like big treasure, what was the strain of muskies I was talking about? Quad 4 strain. So when the guy that we communicated about this issue, when he wrote his letter being like, hey, what gives? The Conservation Congress supported it and advanced it. How come no movement? The department came back to him. The department. This is the Fish and Game Department, Wisconsin DNR coming back to him. The department does not plan to advance this proposal as a DNR rule change question. Spearing northern pike through the ice may raise user conflicts with other ice fishers.
It also may not, right? I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Since implementation of a rule change in 1993 that eliminated the January and February spearing seasons on the Menominee and Brule rivers, no winter spearing has been allowed in Wisconsin, with the exception of ice spearing on Lake Superior. Spearing can be selective for the largest pike in the population. A lot of maize and cans.
So if I get that argument correctly, he's saying that because spearfishing is so selective of the largest pike, then it could have negative population consequences?
No, it's other guys bitching that they're going to spear all the big pike.
Yeah, that's the implication, right? It's like in your 4-foot chunk of a how many acre lake, your little window that you see, you're going to be selective within that 4-foot chunk out of 158 acres.
But other states allow the spearing of northern pike?
Oh, yeah.
Have we
all
seen
across the northern tier?
Have we seen a truncation of the size distribution in lakes where spearing northern pike is allowed?
I think the problem with that is it's been historically, it's just always been historically present. But what I can tell you could study the dickens out of is the fact that there ain't nobody out spearing pike.
Yeah,
a little bit. It's like a little bit, and they're not hurting anything.
Yeah.
He goes on. The department goes on. There is also concern with spearers mistaking muskellunge for northern pike on water bodies where both congeners, what's that mean?
Same genus.
Where both congeners reside.
Congeners, yeah.
Congeners?
Yep.
That's what that means?
Congenerics, yep.
Oh, good thing you're here.
That's great. Yeah.
Congeners?
Congeners or congenerics, yeah. Same genus, Esox, E-S-O-X.
God, I'm going to start saying that all the time. All the time. Sometimes I get a word like that, I write it on my hand for a few days. And
you want a pen?
Then I got it down. While the public input for the 2023 advisory question was fairly close, more people did not support this proposal, with 3,143 in favor and 3,355 opposed. We just don't govern that way.
You know, it's a buddy of mine. He's a retired railroader out of Missoula. Loves spearing pike. Has only, to my knowledge, speared maybe a handful in many, many seasons because he is actively selecting for a huge pike. He has one pike mounted on his wall in his house. And it does not matter if you've been through that door 1,000 times or for the very first time. Eventually, he'll be like, "Did you see the pike?" And you're like, "Yep, Kim, it's still there." Like, look,
how did he get that one with a spear?
Yep, spearing through the ice. But he's like, he would be and this is an invasive species in this lake. It's the lake that you can underwater spearfish for in western Montana. He would raise holy hell if anybody decided to eradicate the pike from that system because he loves that species so much. So that's just kind of like a random selection of dark house spear fishermen. They're not, or this particular person is right. He's letting every fish go. Yeah. And he's up there all the time. And like the economic impacts that we always talk about, people who do stuff like this, right? It's a weird thing. The other thing that is like worth pointing out here, that's kind of a nowhere type of deal, is like you want to talk about people who discuss climate change and the impacts of that. Talk to spear fishermen. Or I'm sorry, ice fishermen.
Dark house
ice
guy.
anglers.
Ice anglers.
Yeah.
The catch is going down. They didn't ice fish this year.
The amount of days, right? They didn't get out at all. But that could be a reason for the DNR to be like, well, why would we put in the expense of rewriting the regs for something that's trending downward anyway? Well, yeah.
On that, like I grew up in big time pike country in Michigan. We fished. That was our primary one of our primary ice fish. Let me put it this way. That was our only ice big game fish that we concentrated on. You could spear, you could tip up. You want to see some bloody ice, go out there on a big tip up day. If you were out for numbers, running tip ups is going to give you bigger numbers of fish.
Well, weren't you saying that your lake as a kid had a bunch of dead pike all over during the summertime? Like people would kill them and leave them. Is that right?
Yeah, you see a lot of that.
Right. But that's
after the bass opener, the lake shore is like littered with fish that got let go with a night crawler in its anus. All right, moving on. Let's talk about Mercury and Fish for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. Reason I want to talk about Mercury and Fish is one, we have a beloved colleague, who he claims to have been mercury poisoned.
Claims.
I have been eating fish most of my life in waters that carry a health advisory, state health advisories.
Yep.
I lived for a while in Seattle, and we would have people not eat the perch we caught because they knew that those fish had a health advisory. people are aware of it. There was just recently an article in the New York Times about, you probably saw this. If we've been so successful in cutting mercury what's the word? Not admissions,
Emissions.
mercury emissions. If we've been so successful in curbing mercury emissions, why do tuna still have mercury in them?
It takes a very long time for mercury to leave the environment.
Mm-hmm.
It can be actually a bigger problem in freshwater systems than offshore because no one's taking anything out of. Think of remote lakes in Canada, for example. Atmospheric deposition of mercury puts mercury in that water. It's taken up by algae, other phytoplankton. It enters the food chain that way. It works its way up into, let's say walleye are the top predator in a given lake.
Mm-hmm.
Then if very few people are fishing that lake, harvesting fish out of that lake, the mercury never leaves. That's
how the mercury has to be removed?
Pretty much. It's got a very long half-life.
It's got to be eaten?
It's got a very long half-life.
Yeah.
And so it just stays in the system. And it's actually the lakes that are fished harder that tend to have lower mercury levels in the fish. Yeah. And
like you're hauling the mercury out when you haul fish away.
It's
get them big muskies out of there.
Well, there's no, once it's in the food web, I mean, there's not really any mitigation that can be done. It's not like you can spray a lake and tie up the mercury.
Where's it all coming from in the first place? Just industrial pollution?
Or, right. Fossil fuels
Well, how are they curbing? I got a ton of questions about this now.
I thought mercury was so heavy that it just works its way down.
In its elemental form, it's super dense, right? But the mercury that's dangerous to animals from a toxicity standpoint is the methylated form. So it's got a carbon and a couple hydrogens on it. The density of that molecule, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not like the silver liquid you're thinking of in a thermometer.
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff, yeah, that you probably played with. You and I both, that's why we're bald, played with as kids in elementary school. No, that stuff is gone.
How have we slowed emissions? We haven't slowed fossil fuel consumption.
Well, depending on who you mean by we have slowed fossil fuel consumption as
globally.
No. How have we slowed the emission of mercury? It's about scrubbing procedures when those fossil fuel, when that gas is being emitted from coal burning power.
So when you hear about clean coal or whatever, or is that different?
No, you're on the right track. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although we're hearing less about clean coal, but yeah.
But that would be scrubbed, like where the emissions are scrubbed.
Exactly, and mercury's part of that.
Okay.
Yep.
And then they use mercury in mining applications.
It's out of my pay grade.
Okay. And that's not making its way. I mean, they use mercury in like leach mining.
Okay.
But I don't know if that gets into the water system because everybody talks about the atmospheric mercury that gets into your fish.
Yep. And depending on the fish, it could be both. It could be that point source. If you're talking about a fish that's in an estuary or close to shore, like bluefin tuna, for example, you brought up tuna. Bluefin tuna have elevated mercury often. They're apex predators. They're eating a lot of fish that are associated with shore, that are living in rivers and systems that might be influenced by a single factory or something upstream. But then you have fish that never come close to shore, like blue marlin, for example, that live in the blue water pelagic environment for their entire life. The mercury that's in those animals is just from non-point source, from atmospheric deposition coming down in the rain.
And atmospheric deposition is global.
Correct.
I mean, you could go to the remotest corner of the Indian Ocean.
Yep.
And mercury rains down.
Yep.
In that.
You'd find a Budweiser bottle, a Food Lion bag, and some microplastics, and there'd be mercury there. Yep.
Got it.
But not in the concentration, right, of like the Great Lakes in its heyday of the industrial output of the Industrial Revolution, right?
Well, in general, since the 1970s, mercury deposition worldwide has gone down, largely as a result of the environmental movement in North America in that time. And again, a little out of my depth here, but we as a country put put pressure on other countries to be more environmentally responsible with the emissions and the burning of fossil fuels, and that lowers atmospheric deposition of mercury too.
Got it. So do you picture, if current practices continue, is there a day in which all of a sudden you notice that there's no more health advisories on the consumption of wild fish?
Probably out of the lifetime of everyone in this room, unfortunately. That's my guess.
It'd take that long.
Yeah, because you have some places where there's just super high concentrations, and you have some species that are just notorious for high mercury content.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see.
So you can put the fact that we're putting less of it out there is not being represented in what we're seeing when we sample fish. That's fair to say.
No, it is being represented because
Well, I'm saying we're not seeing like I said with this article's point about tuna, we're putting less of it in the air.
Sure.
But we're not yet seeing less of it in our fish.
Oh, I see. Well, so first of all, I'll say that in order to observe a decline in a toxicant like mercury, you have to have a really long time series of information. So in other words, in order to observe that decline, you'd have to have the data going back to, say, the 1970s. I'm not a tuna guy. I love eating tuna. I'm not aware of what sort of long-term data sets there are for tuna muscle. And we keep saying tuna, but there's all these species in all these different environments. So I was part of a study a couple of years ago where we did have a long-term data set for blue marlin mussel that went back to the 1970s, and we did observe a decline.
Who was collecting that? How?
Yeah, good question. So the federal government, the National Marine Fisheries Service, otherwise known as NOAA Fisheries, has a laboratory in Beaufort, North Carolina, where I live. And there were scientists there and at the Duke University Marine Lab, also in Beaufort, that began collecting muscle tissue from blue marlin in the 1970s from, in fact, the Big Rock Blue Marlin tournament, which is something that you've covered on this podcast.
Yeah.
So opportunistic sampling of muscle taken from the animals that were landed in that tournament, and in the 70s also animals that were landed willy-nilly and just brought to shore or maybe in other tournaments. So they analyzed those data then. It's not like we had crusty chunks of marlin.
Oh, I thought maybe they were drying it or something. Okay.
Yeah, no, they analyzed those data then, and then we had there was a gap of 25 years, and then in the late 90s, scientists at that same lab, the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Beaufort, began collecting muscle again from blue marlin in the Big Rock tournament. The NC State University lab, where I went to graduate school in Morehead City, North Carolina, took over that sampling in the early 2000s and created a long-term data set. I think the data in the paper went up to maybe 2022. Mm-hmm. So that's 40-year, 30-year, 40-year, 50-year time series, of blue marlin mussel. And there was a marked decline in the content of total mercury and methyl mercury in that mussel from the 1970s to present day.
God, thank God. Well, good news.
Good news. And the other good news is, for blue marlin in particular, for some reason, I don't know if I have a good speculation here, but for some reason, blue marlin are special in that most of the mercury in their muscle tissue is not the nasty stuff, the methylated form. For most fish, when they're forming, FDA, EPA are forming consumption advisories, they're sampling the muscle for total mercury. It's much easier to run a sample for total mercury in the muscle tissue. They're coming up with an advisory at 3 parts per million or 5 parts per million or whatever, just based on that total mercury number, because they're assuming that all of that mercury is methyl mercury, the nasty stuff. That's true for most fish. Most of the total mercury is the methyl form, but in blue marlin, it's a fraction of the total, which is really good from the standpoint of consumption. Now, I'm not hoping that people are going to go out and start chewing
targeting and eating blue marlin.
Exactly. The stock's overfished and apex predators. We don't want to take a lot of them out of the system anyway. But you could eat blue marlin from a safety standpoint. Very few of the samples in our study flirted with the consumption advisory.
Well, I mean, Steve will tell you what you can and can't eat on a fisheries side of things.
From an authority standpoint?
Steve?
Well, what do you mean?
I mean, you're just going to eat it.
Yeah. Well, I was
matter
going to
what.
tell you my favorite quote, which I've said 1,000 times. Me and Jani were with a friend of ours that likes to fish flatheads.
Yeah.
And when we asked him about his feeling about eating all those flatheads, he said, if I catch and eat so many big flatheads that it kills me, I win. So somewhat fatalistic viewpoint.
Yeah. Markedly so.
I've never changed my fish consumption behavior because of health advisories, but it nags in the back of my head. The same way when I'm eating deer meat, even if I had it tested, if I'm eating deer meat from areas that has like CWD, it is always in the back of my head.
So have you been tested for mercury?
No.
No intention to do so?
No, I would definitely do it. If you got a kit right now, I would do it right now.
A kit, yeah. Not some other bag.
Could there ever be an at-home test for like fish meat you bring home?
No, not other than from a culinary standpoint.
It's a centrifuge. Like, isn't that what you do? You like put your blood samples in a centrifuge and spin them up, and then it separates.
I left my medical career behind a long time ago, but I know a guy in Morehead City who had blood drawn explicitly for a mercury test because he was wondering. He's like, man, I eat a lot of fish.
How did he
and
do?
Shellfish. Passed with flying colors.
That's good to hear.
That's when they were doing
I'm going
that.
to text our doctor and see if we can get a mercury
that's
test
good.
done.
Well, recently I texted. So recently Jani texted. We were worried we had low T.
Oh.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
So Jani sent a note to our doctor wondering about his tea. And then a couple minutes later, I happened to send her a note wondering about my tea. And she's like, and I caught her breaking the Hippocratic Oath. Because she said, are you guys sitting around talking about testosterone? And I was like, who exactly? Who exactly are you referring to? Because I was under the impression this is all very secret.
Isn't the Hippocratic Oath do no harm? That's nothing. You're thinking
I
of
meant the part about not telling people's secrets.
Patient doctor confidentiality.
Yeah, that's what she broke.
Yeah.
What cracks
I
me
was
up
like, who guys?
about Steve is a Michigander, eats every single fish, and I think like one of the more thorough fish consumption advisories comes out of the state of Michigan. It seems like that's the state that has put the most work into, and it's based off of like the Mitten state. So it's a Michigan portion. So you put your hand up, and that represents your fish fillet.
Oh,
and then the quantity based off of your weight and size.
That's right, yeah.
Is like you can have a thumb-size portion once a week.
Yep.
Or you can have a palm-size portion once a month.
Yeah.
But I've always, that's made me chuckle.
In Lake Washington, in Seattle, I don't know what it is now, but for a while the the fish advisory is very specific, where they would even get into sizes of fish. Meaning, an example would be, there was no restriction, or what? Not restriction is not the word. There was no advisory on perch under 12 inches.
Yep.
But perch over 12 inches carried a health advisory.
Yeah, and they do it differently for children, men, pregnant women. Montana has some real specific, like size-based advisories for fish.
Steve, would you feed a pregnant woman mercury-filled fish?
Along with your cigarettes?
Not would I.
I
No.
Because here's the thing about it. I don't want to spend all of I want to talk about alternative energy, but here's the thing about it. If you're a fisherman, everything if you're a fisherman and you dig into your regs, you're seeing the health advisories. But when you go to the grocery store and buy fish, you're just not. That would all carry a health advisory as well.
You've seen a lot of fresh. I'm actually asking a lot of fresh caught wild walleye at the grocery store.
No, but there's a wild walleye commercial fishery.
Sure.
In Ontario.
Yeah.
So when you go and buy that, or when you go to a perch fry on Friday night in Michigan, you're not presented with the health advisory information. But if you're a fisherman, you get your nose rubbed in it. So I'm like, I feel like for people to think that this is a thing happening to fishermen, it's a thing happening to people that go to sushi restaurants.
Yeah. So
What do you mean,
what's your ask?
What
Do you
does
want
it
it on
matter?
the menu? Do you want it on the menu?
No, I'm saying that this isn't a thing for people that fish. This is a thing for people that eat fish.
Sure.
And I just got this thing. There's this organization that does like fish. They do fish consumption estimates 25 years, 50 years down the road. And they expect fish consumption to go up globally. So it's not like people that, we're talking about for people that go and catch a wahoo. It's people that eat a wahoo.
Yep. So I guess we need to continue to reduce emissions and
Yes.
keep that mercury level down.
But for people to be like, oh, you fish, you must eat a lot of mercury. It's like, you go out to eat with your wife, you must eat a lot of mercury.
I wonder if in general there's a presumption that people who fish or buy a fishing license are eating more fish than people who are going to the grocery store to get that fish.
I think so.
Dude, if you love sushi and you're going out once a week and eating big pelagics, the kind of stuff that people go to sushi restaurants to eat, you're pounding a lot of mercury compared to some dude that thumps a couple walleye now and then.
Trout. I mean, I hate to play into Steve's hand here, but think of the amount of catch and release trout fishermen we all know that the only fish that they're eating are coming from the grocery store.
Yeah.
Like, they're just not.
So
but
they
even
fish,
if they were,
but they're getting their mercury from down at, I don't know, the sushi joint. I can't name our old sushi joint.
they got enough fish.
I got to think of
Just as one example, I think if I didn't get fish from you guys or my in-laws from Beaufort, North Carolina, when they bring us some shrimp, we wouldn't really eat fish.
No, we're slowly killing.
We just don't. I don't. I don't
one
buy
looks
it
like
at
it
the
has a lot
grocery
of
store.
mercury in it.
Yeah. To Brendan's point, I don't buy
Brody
it at the
holds him
grocery
up to the
store.
light, trying to see the
Give
mercury
that one
in
to
there.
Janis.
I just don't buy a lot of fish.
I'm with the honest. Like, dude, we eat way more. Like,
Oh, listen, I'm an outlier.
Like
We eat an
orders of
enormous amount of
magnitude
fish.
more
We
than
eat
the
enormous
average,
amounts
yeah.
of fish.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to now move on to where you're actually an expert.
Okay.
The only.
But I appreciate you just dragging you into this. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was straining my brain to try to figure out the last fish that I bought at a grocery store. And it has to get like further divided because it's like the only fish I've purchased at a grocery store is bait to go catch other fish with.
I would never buy it at a grocery store. In fact, there's no way.
Smelt.
Nope.
Well, I mean.
Oh, yes, what you bought.
Right.
I'll eat it all day long in restaurants, but I would never buy it at a store
yes.
to prepare it at home. Because if I'm home, I'll just eat it out of my freezer. But if I go to a restaurant and there's fish, I'm probably getting the fish.
Okay. Back on track. Sorry.
Brendan Runde is a marine scientist with the Nature Conservancy. And Corinne's been really wanting to get him on because we've been wanting to talk about offshore alternative energy development and what it might mean for fish, which led to a broader conversation about where I wanted to have that discussion as a example of the opportunities, challenges, compromises around alternative energy development, which comes at a cost. Fair?
All energy development comes at a cost.
Comes
Fair.
at a cost.
Yeah.
Now, I want to lay out something that I said. I'm going to tell you something I said on previous episodes. On a previous episode when we talked about this. And then I'm going to let you run. But I just want to tee this up. If I was the emperor of the world. No, if I was the emperor of the country.
The emperor, everybody.
If I was in charge of America. If I was solely in charge of America. And my people came to me and said, here's our plan on developing currently undeveloped landscapes, offshore, onshore. Here's our plan to take currently undeveloped landscapes and develop them for alternative energy in order to combat climate change. I would say, man, here's why I'm not into it. I'm not into it because I fear that we're going to make these changes. These changes will not be enough to counteract what's happening on the Indian subcontinent, in China and Russia, okay, we will see no net decrease in fossil fuel consumption, and we will have burnt up our biggest asset, which is our wildlife habitat. So we'll have destroyed a bunch of wildlife habitat and seen no difference in global average temperatures.
Okay.
Now you go.
Yeah. So a couple things. So we're in a climate crisis. Fair?
Yes. Well, yeah, we're seeing, yes.
If you're a Michigan ice fisherman, hell yeah.
We're seeing annual increases. And I don't want to go back like what they do where they try to go back 1,000 years because we just weren't measuring temperature the same.
Right.
But in the modern era with how we measure temperature now, we are seeing increases. And there's some little blips and stuff, but generally we are seeing increased temperatures, and we're seeing impacts of increased temperatures on fisheries, on wildlife, on marine resources.
Yep.
And we're seeing like some chaotic weather patterns.
We're seeing range shifts, range expansions of many marine species, many terrestrial species for that matter. The United States is responsible for 15% of the carbon emissions globally.
Okay.
China's responsible for 30. All right. But we have the leg up because we industrialized 100 years before them. So we have an opportunity right now because we have the means and the motive to try to transition from an electricity generating sector that's largely dependent on fossil fuels into energy sources that do not produce any further carbon emissions. To your point about if we don't do this now, no one else is going to do anything else. We still have the opportunity to bring that down, to get rid of that 15%, to turn that 15% into zero. Whether or not any of the other nations on this planet partake in transitioning from fossil fuel burning electricity production to renewable energies, we're still responsible for a huge portion of that. So as a nation, we can move towards an electricity producing sector that produces no carbon, and we should. That's why it's the goal of this presidential administration and the goal of the Nature Conservancy to bring us to net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. That's only 26 years from now. We need a major uptake in the production of renewable energies like wind and solar on land and also offshore. Can I respond to one other thing that you said?
You can talk for an hour if you want.
Okay, start the
I
clock.
doubt it.
So I understand your trepidation about the loss of habitat.
Can you within this touch on the BLM's proposal?
Definitely.
Okay. Tell everybody about that.
So right now, the Bureau of Land Management is overseeing something called the Western Solar Plan. Mm-hmm. This is maybe going to be a little jargony. There's right now a draft programmatic environmental impact statement for the Western Solar Plan. There are several alternatives in that plan. They all involve opening public land, BLM land, to solar application. What does solar application mean? Solar application means that land has cleared the first hurdle, the first governmental hurdle to be identified as suitable for the building of solar farms. It doesn't mean that all of that land, under any circumstance, will eventually have solar on it. You've seen a lot in the news about the government-selected preferred alternative of that solar plan, which would open 22 million acres of public land to solar application.
Public hunting ground. Let's just call it that.
Mm-hmm.
BLM lands upon which a variety of consumptive and non-consumptive outdoor activities can take place.
Well, you mentioned that, and at the same time, the BLM has promised to prioritize recreation activities and wildlife habitat. So how do these two things
I'm glad you asked. So there's one other alternative in that plan that would only open 8 million acres to solar application. And that 8 million acres is lands that are both already disturbed and are within 10 miles of existing transmission infrastructure. So that's one thing to support with this, where we know we need more renewable energy production. We have an opportunity. We can build solar on lands that are already disturbed. By the way, 23 million acres of federal land is currently in oil and gas leases. 23 million acres. 12 million acres currently producing oil and gas.
Hit me with those numbers again.
23 million acres of federal land, more than the preferred alternative in the draft programmatic environmental impact statement. 23 million acres of federal land are currently leased to oil and gas companies.
Okay.
12 million acres currently producing oil and gas of public land.
So one of these proposals would more than double the amount of land. Would more than double the amount of land given to energy production.
Yeah, I understand the question, but what I'm not sure about is whether there's overlap in that 22 million acres for solar and 23
for
million.
the $8 million or 8 million acre plan.
Yep.
They would use existing roads and things like that are being used by fossil fuel extraction operations, or
wherever possible.
Yeah.
We want to use existing transmission infrastructure, which of course includes things like roads. It includes things like power lines, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we know we need, and that the Nature Conservancy is working towards identifying the lowest impact ways to build out a clean energy economy.
Right, because I mean, not only do you have like the idea of solar panels covering the ground, but all the roads and infrastructure you would have to build is not much different than what's already being done by fossil fuel operations.
The footprint of any energy installation is not restricted to just the infrastructure that's generating the electricity.
Who are the biggest players that are for and against this?
When you say this, do you mean the renewable energy transition in general or the BLM proposal?
The BLM one.
It's got to be a bitter pill for environmental groups who've built their careers, who've built their organizations on fighting energy development.
I don't think it's a bitter pill at all. I think
it's in my mouth right now. It's bitter.
Well, certainly not for every environmental group. So there's always trade-offs with building any energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
And why would we not transition to building renewable energy infrastructure? Why would we stick with fossil fuels when we have the opportunity to build infrastructure, to build utility scale projects that produce electricity at no net carbon emissions?
You're asking a huge question. And I'm trying to keep this conversation contained because I could come in with a lot of things that are sort of out of my area of direct interest and expertise, and I would get into, I guess, national security questions. I don't know. Like I don't even know. I don't even know where the conversation would go. If we were talking about it from a sort of a perspective of the U.S. economy, security, it could go 100 directions.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. But from a public land standpoint,
that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. There's always trade-offs. Over the last several decades, we've seen oil and gas exploration. We've seen new oil and gas leases. So if we're going on public lands, if we're going to use public lands in the generation of electricity, why would we continue to do that with fossil fuels and not transition to renewables?
I can't really tell you. A thing that I would explore would be efficiency, meaning energy per unit of space.
Okay, that's one way to measure efficiency, sure. But it's also about containing the climate crisis and trying to curb emissions and bring us to an energy sector that's not continuing to contribute to what we've seen over the last several years: runaway temperatures, species shifting their distributions, all the things we just touched on.
Are you familiar? I can't remember who. There's a novelist who's a big birder. The hell's his name?
The French name guy? That guy?
No. He's a contemporary novelist, and he's a big birder.
A novelist, not nonfiction.
Who wrote the corrections? Was it him? Either way.
But not Leaves of, what is it, Leaves of Grant? No, okay.
Either way, it doesn't matter. There's a perspective. His perspective was this. His perspective was, as the climate's changing, the climate's going to change. The best thing we can give wildlife is sanctuary to withstand those changes. Wildlife places to be wild and weather the storm. And again, like I want you, like I don't want to, like, I'm not looking to debate it. Sure. I'm just trying to lay out my reticence, and then I want you just to go. Okay. But that's my reticence is that we would give up like any amount of good functioning, pristine wildlife habitat in exchange for chasing a thing that I'm not sure we can get. But I'm sure we're going to lose habitat in chasing it.
We're not necessarily going to lose pristine habitat. As I mentioned, one of the alternatives in this Western Solar Plan only includes previously disturbed lands. So we're not talking about cutting up.
What is the definition of that?
You'd have to look at
because you could go to a ranch and say that's previously disturbed.
Isn't it?
Not from a wildlife perspective.
Okay, so then
I'm a cows not condos guy.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this is so like I'll make the bargain with you right now. Like I'd be way more into it if my version of disturbed, right? Like these old well pads, the infrastructure that go out to, you fly over, parts of the Red Desert, all that stuff. Yep. That type of infrastructure, bam, gets replaced with green energy infrastructure. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see that. Like we're not gonna, in any sort of good way, be able to like rehab that into the mixed grass prairie that it once was.
So the good news here is that the public is involved in this process at every step of the way. Right now, there's a public comment period open for the Western Solar Plan. This is going to drop April 1st, I heard. The public comment period is open until April 18th. There, right now, if you go to...
That's 3 days after the tickets go on sale.
That's right. Yep. Get your tickets. Get your tickets to the live show.
Yeah, you got a couple days to recoup.
A couple days, proceed right to the BLM's website. Take a look. There will be recordings of virtual meetings that have already happened, but you can listen to the virtual webinars describing the solar plan. Maybe somebody asked, what's your definition of disturbed lands? Maybe you can get a nice crisp answer from the BLM on that. And then you can provide public comment. Tell them what you think. And that's the case with any, not just solar, that's the case with any of these environmental impact statements, which every renewable or fossil fuel related project has to go through an environmental impact statement. And the public is involved in every step of the way. The public is involved in narrowing down the area that's opened. The public is involved in reading and commenting on the proposal from the company, the construction and operations plan, all the way through until the project is built.
I think that there are 6 options, if I'm not mistaken, like 5 different frameworks for the plan. And then if I read this correctly, there's a no action status quo option, which I think
there's always
nothing happens.
Yep. So. There's always a no action alternative.
Mm-hmm. Is there any existing studies like where large scale solar operations have been built, like on wildlife impact? Like, are they like what are they basing what they're going to do and what's going to happen on?
That's a little out of my expertise.
Yeah. I mean, it almost feels like we're like, yeah, after you, but it's just like questions I have.
No, that's perfectly fair. I mean, there are ways that you can mitigate the impact on wildlife to things like a solar project. For example, most solar projects are going to have a fence around them. That's not great from a migration standpoint, but you can make a permeable fence maybe not for an elk, but for foxes, okay, for desert tortoise. You can have openings in the fence and allow them to move through that project, even though it's there. And they do. We actually have footage of desert tortoises and swift foxes running along a solar farm's fence and cutting through.
There's two things I want to do, and you pick whatever one you want next.
And then we should move to offshore.
One move is talk about offshore.
Yeah, that's a good
which
one.
I'd like you to explain. The other move is we have an election coming up this November.
What are you running for?
If there's an administration change somewhere within this conversation, if there's a change in administration, how much of this just becomes a non-issue? I mean, Trump said he joked and was taken, like everything he says, he like makes a joke and everybody actually serious. He joked that, oh no, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be a dictator for a day.
Just a day?
He's joking. He doesn't have the authority. He said, someone says, oh, everyone's afraid you're gonna be a dictator. And he goes, no, I'm gonna be a dictator one day. And on that day, I'm gonna close the border and I'm gonna take some action. I can't remember how I articulated it. Take some action to increase domestic oil production. Then he says, then I'm going to quit being a dictator.
Let's do the offshore one.
Okay. We'll do offshore, but I want to come back, like all the things we're talking about. How much does this ride on? Like how much, if you come back next January 7, how much would everything we just discussed become a non-issue because there was a change in administrations?
I can provide you with several names within the Nature Conservancy who would love to come on this program and answer that question.
Okay.
I got one more question on here, and it's okay if we just like leave it on the table, but there's a finite amount of public land, and it's declining. Of that public land habitat, a lot of it is already in question. We're losing good habitat. What's the private land existing infrastructure option to carry out and get us to the same, net zero endpoint?
Like if we did this in a willing seller, willing buyer scenario.
Like wind farms. I mean, a lot of those are on private land.
It's a great question.
I'm a cows, not turbines kind of guy.
Yeah. Well,
are we saying turbines or turbines?
Turbines.
We should
turbines.
We should decide now. Which
oh
one
yeah,
we're
you're
all
right. Turbines.
No, that I think that there is a lot of ground to make up by putting this infrastructure on private lands. And one thing that the Nature Conservancy's done some analyses towards is rooftop solar, not just on homes, but on big box stores, things like that. An analysis was done that suggested that if 35% of all suitable rooftops had solar on them by 2050, which is aggressive, but maybe reasonable.
Sure.
A third of all roofs in the United States.
This is going to be hell on pigeons.
That alone would meet 10% of our needs for electricity.
Right? What level of compliance or what level of
35%?
A third of rooftops covered by solar panels. That's 10%. So that's a way.
That's it.
Right. There you go. Now imagine.
Okay. There's a bunch of the problem right there.
That's a bunch of the problem. And I think you recently said something about sports stadiums.
Yep.
Just fill that whole thing in with solar?
I would say the Bears, Chicago Bears Stadium, first one to go.
Great.
Minnesota Vikings, number 2.
Great.
Goodbye. Yeah.
To any one of those things that opens up, it's now closed. The top, the roof, closed, covered.
What are you, a Packers fan?
Yeah, that's right.
Who would pay for the BLM proposal if they did this, started doing this tomorrow?
That's a great question. Who pays for it?
I assume there's some private individuals that are footing the bills to build these things.
Do you mean who pays for the build out of the actual infrastructure?
All of it. Are we paying for some portion of it, or is it mostly private individuals who are standing to make money off this?
They're going to sell the lease, or what are they going to do? How's it work?
Oh, okay. So it's a win-win. So yeah, I know. Get ready for this.
It's a win-win-lose.
Strap in. So the developer applies for a lease from the federal government.
Okay.
Or in the offshore wind space, the federal government holds an auction for the lease, for the rights to build a project on that ground. It might go for 10 million, 100 million, whatever. Depends on the lease, depends on how big it is, where it is, whatever. That money goes into the general treasury. That's in our pockets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The company then has the rights to develop that ground, generate electricity, and that goes in their pockets once they start making money.
Once they start pouring it into the grid.
Which in the offshore wind space, not a lot of is happening yet, but we're on the brink.
So it would operate just like fossil fuel
from an economics.
Like the BLM makes money off it.
Yeah.
Like the American public makes money off it.
Or cattle grazing.
And and
I gotta feel it's more lucrative than the cattle.
It's definitely
cattle contracts.
Yeah. So as far as
hopefully,
as far as putting solar wind on private land, that does put money in the pocket of the landowner big time. The companies are really proprietary about how much money, but it's more lucrative than cattle ranching or growing corn.
I don't even want to get into any details. I have a friend that is in conversation with the solar people. It's life-changing money.
So there you go.
Like it's generational money.
So if you're listening to this and you got a big patch of ground, you want to
turn the radio, turn it off, please. If you're listening to this, got a big patch of ground, turn it off.
But I mean, we got all these buildings out there that are already patched in to the grid somehow, some way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right? I mean, there's going to need to be, like, if you're generating some serious juice, you know.
Sure. High voltage.
But that shit, I don't, like, lay a big, gross-looking cable off the top. I don't care about that.
Sure.
If it's fixing this problem. But, like, you know, I just came back from Pheasant Fest, right? And, you know, we talk a lot about grasslands, right? The most imperiled ecosystem in North America, right? And I'm like, what? If you can say, like, this is the solution, then I'm like, oh, some trade-offs, but I really want it to be in these places that are already messed up for wildlife. But if, like, we have all this stuff that is never going to go back to supporting anything but feral cats.
Yep.
Like, let's slap some rooftop solar on that stuff.
Yeah, I want to get to offshore bad, but it's like, just for your colleagues, for you and your colleagues, please just make sure you're like really digging into like old junky vacant lots, like just whatever. Okay, whatever you guys can find.
Well, I encourage you to exercise
parking lots that you park under the panels.
I've parked in those.
So it's not even that you lose the parking lot.
Yep.
It's covered parking.
And what about agrivoltaics, which we haven't touched on, but you can grow, especially fruits and vegetables, underneath solar panels. You can graze cattle, dairy cattle in particular, produce more milk when they are underneath solar panels, when they don't have exposure to extreme heat, extreme sunlight.
Great. This is what I need to hear.
I'm here for you.
I want to talk about offshore, but I don't want to hear about. I need to hear about all the alternatives before we start talking about going out onto perfectly fine ground and breaking it up. And I would say this, I'd say that if it's coal, I'd say if it's gas, it's just like, I just don't think we can afford to lose habitat.
We agree with you. We are looking for the lowest impact alternatives.
Okay, let's talk about offshore.
And while I do just a little tip for you, if you want to talk about offshore from an improving fishing standpoint, that'd be a good way to do it.
Yeah, we're gonna lean into the program.
He's got that.
Is that where you want to start?
What's the current? Give us where offshore. I do this. Explain what offshore means, because there's state offshore and federal offshore.
Sure.
And then what are we currently doing for offshore wind, and what are we getting out of it?
Yep. Set the stage. So the distinguishing characteristic between state and federal waters is the 3 mile line.
Okay.
So in the Atlantic. So 3 miles from shore, the state has fisheries management jurisdiction, leasing the bottom jurisdiction. Once you get outside that 3 mile line and to the edge of the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, at 200 miles, that's federally controlled.
Okay.
Right?
I wasn't aware of the where it ended.
200, and then it's international waters.
Got it.
Yep.
So 3 it becomes fed, and then at 200 it becomes sort of everybody.
3 to 200, and then it's everybody, it's nobody, it's foreign fishing fleets, it's offshore accounts. They're out there somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Little piles of money floating around.
That's a fish aggregating device right there.
Yeah, the bales of cocaine and
Man. So here's where we are with offshore wind right now. As of last week, there are 24 operational power producing wind turbines in the United States Atlantic. 5 are actually in state waters off Block Island, Rhode Island.
Yep.
They were the first. It's a Rhode Island thing, I think.
Fished it.
Totally. 2017, they built 5. Then off of Virginia in federal waters, first federal project was built in 2020. 2 turbines.
Okay, how big?
In what, by what metric? They're 6 megawatts each. They're
the circumference. What is the circumference of the thing coming out of the water, where it comes out of the water?
What's today? Friday. I was fishing around it 5 days ago. Close enough that you could reach out and touch it with your fishing rod. Not that you should, because that would be trespassing.
Mm-hmm.
The diameter, which is easier for me to estimate, is maybe 20 feet coming out at the surface of the water. It's bigger, of course, at the seafloor, slightly tapered, larger at the seafloor. The tip of the blade, when it's spinning and it's straight up and down, is 600, 650 off the surface of the ocean.
Okay.
And this is a 6 megawatt
And
turbine.
it's in how much water?
85 feet. 85 feet of depth. Yep. So
how's that son of a bitch anchored down?
Well, we'll get into that because that's important. But let me give you the rest of the rundown here. I won't spend too much time on it.
No, you're good.
Then you've got a handful more projects that are underway right now off of between like Long Island and Martha's Vineyard, that little stretch of coast. One project just finished up last week. 12 is the number, 12 total turbines. Then there's another one that's underway. They've got 5. So 5, 12, and 2. So that's 24. That's where we
currently in the Atlantic Ocean in U.S. water. U.S. or state waters is
producing
24.
power.
Okay.
24. Right now.
Can I ask one more question as you set this whole thing up?
Yeah.
Can you compare the output of one of, because I think most people haven't seen that, but most people have been driving down the road and they've seen a wind farm.
Yep.
So in size and output,
yep,
how similar is it to what you see off in the distance when you're driving down the highway?
Offshore is way bigger.
They're bigger. Okay.
Yeah. So on land, your typical wind turbine generator is 3.5 megawatts.
Okay.
So I just mentioned the ones off Virginia are 6 megawatts. That's the pilot or research project for that developer. They will begin building a commercial scale project this May. They're going to be putting in 14 megawatt wind turbine generators. That project will be 176 turbines. It's going to power 660,000 homes annually. 660,000 homes will be powered by those wind turbines off Virginia. So that project, that's a fairly big one, 176, fairly big one in terms of what's been leased right now. But Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, is the regulatory agency tasked with all of the permitting and all of the everything with offshore wind. Their current estimate by the year 2030 is just over 3,000 turbines in the U.S. Atlantic. That's the maximal build out. I think we're going to land a little lower than that in the 2s, in the 2000s.
By what year?
2030. Yeah, it's 2024. So 6 years from now, 3,000, more like 2,500 probably.
You said that's the
I'm
max
thinking about just
build
the gold rush for welders and shit, man.
Yeah. Well, there's a supply chain that needs to catch up. So the
max. God, man, you need to get more kids signing up for Vogue.
Big time.
In high school.
Yeah.
So I'll give you what I mean by the maximal build out. So take the Virginia project, for example. The maximal build out of that project was about 208 turbines. They are only going to build 176. Where's the other 32 going? Well, they, through a collaborative process with the public and with the federal government, decided to lay off a couple locations that were too close to important resources like shipwrecks, like artificial reefs. They said, okay, we could build one here, and it's not going to be on top of a shipwreck, but it's close enough, and this is a valuable enough piece of bottom that people like to fish, that we're not going to build our turbines there. We're just going to carve out a little box. And that type of thing is likely to happen with a lot of these projects, which is why I say the maximal build out's 3,000. I think we're going to be maybe, 20% lower than that.
Can you hit me with, let's go to the current ones. How many miles from shore are the current ones?
So the one I was fishing under 5 days ago is 27 nautical miles from Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Okay.
Straight east.
And you're still owning 85 feet of water there.
Yeah, the continental shelf is a mysterious mistress and drops off at different distances from shore depending on where you are. Off Florida, you're 5 miles from the beach, you're in 1,000 feet of water. But off Virginia, you gotta go a lot farther to get to that continental shelf break.
Okay.
Yep.
And then to transmit this energy or transport this energy.
Oh yeah.
Are you trying to like bring things to a centralized cable and then bring that onshore, or what's the infrastructure there? So sorry, we should hit Steve's question of how is that sumbitch anchored down?
Which one you want to go to first? Transmission or
just real quick touch on? I'm just curious the engineering on it.
Yeah. So again, I'll speak from the Virginia project that I'm most familiar with. 176 turbines within that farm will spider web to 3 offshore substations, which will then package up that power into larger cables and shoot them to shore in a cable export corridor.
Oh, are those substations above or below water?
Above water. Yep.
How big is that?
I'm not sure.
Like an oil rig kind of looking thing?
Yeah, it looked like an oil rig. Yep.
And okay. Now, how do you anchor them down?
Yeah, the footprint of the actual turbine.
The pole.
Yeah.
Okay. The pad.
Well, there's no pad. So here's So most of the projects that are under development right now or will contribute to that 3,000 by 2030 number are built with what are called monopile foundations, which means, you guessed it, one pole, one piling. These are 30-ish feet in diameter, and they're hammered into the seafloor using a hydraulic hammer. Mm-hmm. A massive vessel comes out there.
Ka-tang, ka-tang.
Holds itself. The vessel has like a power pole to hold you in place, but on a much bigger scale.
No, I've seen these things.
Right. They anchor themselves, and then they drive them in. And then around the base, and this comes into the fish habitat piece, to prevent what we call scour, they put scour protection. Scour is the idea that sediment will move or erode because of currents and tides and things washing by. So if you go to the beach, take your shoes off, walk into the waves, and just stand there, let the waves wash around your feet, you become destabilized as the sand erodes from the pressure of your feet pressing down on it. Same thing happens at a much larger scale offshore. So they put rock or rubble around the base in a donut around the base of the piling.
Mm-hmm.
And that can...
Like the sound of that.
I know it. And that can extend, 60 to 90 feet maybe from the edge of the pole. It's a big donut. And that's,
where does that material come from?
Well, that's a good question. So the Nature Conservancy recently put out a report about different materials that can be used to enhance scour protection. And when I say enhance, I mean from an ecological standpoint, to maximize the amount of positive ecological benefit that we're getting out of this material that's being placed in the water. If left to their own devices, the developers would rely on 2 criteria to decide what they're going to use as scour protection, and those would be the cost of it. We want to keep it cheap because these are $10 billion projects we're talking about. And does it accomplish our engineering objective? Does it do what it's supposed to do? So there's an opportunity here as we sit at an inflection point on the build out of offshore wind with 24 in the water, almost 2,000 plus still to come. There's an opportunity to influence what material is being used as scour protection if we can demonstrate that there is something to gain by switching it up. What they would use if left to their own device would be like quarried rock. It would depend on your geography. It could be limestone, could be granite, whatever they can get their hands on. Another option is repurposed concrete. If somebody rebuilds a bridge or an overpass, all that material that's being busted up, put that on a barge, take it out there. It works.
What's the lifespan of one of these things? And like how long, what percentage of its life does it spend just trying to pay for itself?
So the leases are generally for 25 to 30 years. Most wind turbines pay for themselves within 6 months or a year.
What?
Yeah.
Man, that's efficient.
Is that the same with the ones that we see out here in the West?
Believe so, yeah.
I could believe it there more than I could believe what you're talking about, because that just seems like a bigger pain in the ass building it out in the ocean.
Big pain in the ass.
What happens at the end of that 25 years?
We're not really sure. So I know you guys have spearfished around the remains of oil and gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. There was a program
which is hilarious, because can I lay this out real quick?
Come on.
There's thousands in the Gulf. There are, just like you're talking about, thousands.
2,300 roughly.
Yeah. In the Gulf, there are thousands of oil platforms from offshore oil rigs, and many of them are being retired. And so, to kind of give a little bit of a window into where this conversation is going around this wind development, is these oil rigs made the Gulf bloom. I mean, the oil rigs created a fishery. You're shaking your head.
I'm with you.
They altered. They created a fishery. Now there's a debate around. People are saying, "Well, now that they're here,
right?
Please leave them here, because they generate so much fish. They create so much habitat. They create all these vertical reefs." And so now people that might have lamented them coming in because of the disturbance, increased boat traffic, pollution, are now have gotten used to them. The fishery is built up around them. Anglers have gotten, that's how they fish. And now they're fighting to keep not everybody, some people are fighting to keep the rigs in place to preserve the fishery that the rigs created.
And that's likely to happen with offshore wind too. The fight. I don't know.
All those fights.
I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen 25 or 30 years from now. The decommissioning thing at this point, I believe that technically the fine print says that the developer will take it down to the substrate and leave it looking like it did before they got there, which means removing all of that scour protection material too.
A buddy of mine said when they remove an oil rig in the Gulf, he said there's not even a beer can down there.
Yeah, right. Probably cleaner, leave no trace.
No, he said it's like they come in with like high test sonar, and when they're done, there's nothing.
Nothing.
It's cut off way below the surface. Everything's gone.
And think of the expense, and think of the loss of what may very well be extraordinarily valuable fish habitat. So that's a fight that we're probably going to have in 25 or 30 years. And how much of a fight that is, I don't know. But the opportunity that we have now is to demonstrate whether these are valuable habitat. And in all likelihood, for certain species, they will be. Whether they produce new animals or simply attract animals from elsewhere is a matter of open debate. My suspicion is that 2,000 plus of these structures, we will see for certain species an uptick in production of animals, especially species that are habitat limited or recruitment limited. Black sea bass, for example, might be one. But where we are right now is that this whole thing is in its infancy, and we haven't.
Well, how in its infancy can it be if it's going to be? It's 2024,
right? What I mean is, we're at
how many by 2030? What?
A couple thousand.
Okay, well, it can't be that. I mean,
what I mean is, it's in its infancy.
You got 6 years to build a couple thousand of these.
But
things.
From a scientific study standpoint, we don't have any large, full-scale operational turbines that can be used, wind farms that can be used as a study location.
So the biology is in its infancy, or the ecology is in its infancy.
Correct, and there's a lot of money going into collecting before data right now, as we're for many of these leases in the waning hours of the before period.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to scrape together data that will be valuable comparison down the line when these wind farms are fully built out.
Man, imagine if they had done that in a really good way in the Gulf of Mexico, how valuable that information would be now.
I can imagine.
So if you could go like, well, let's take a look. Now that it's all done, let's take a look at what we won and what we lost.
Yep. And so a lot of scientific, a lot of really cool fisheries work being done.
When you compare this to oil rigs providing habitat and like fishing around defunct oil rigs, like is there going to be travel restrictions in these areas for like the average recreational fisherman, like wanting to run right under an operational?
Yeah, because you could tie off.
That's a bummer. He said you can't touch them, and I was like, there should be anchor points on there so you can put your bungee line on there.
Yeah,
not supposed to touch them. My understanding is that there won't. My understanding is there won't be any restrictions as far as how close you can get.
Right.
Now, there may be
starting to smell the fish.
There may be day-to-day restrictions if there's maintenance or something going on a specific turbine. The developer won't allow you to get up to it. But by and large, I think the recreational fleet or the charter fleet or any hook and line vessel will be able to transit right up into that scour protection, right up into the good habitat.
They need to get real clear on that point. If you're going to want fishermen to buy in on it, you're going to have to really clarify that point. And I would say put a couple mooring cleats on the side of that thing.
I'll place a call about the cleats.
In 2021, Joe Cermelli wrote an article on the MeatEater.com about wind turbines off the coast in New Jersey, and the Atlantic Shores manager, Doug Copeland, said, "You're welcome to fish by the structures. We just ask that you don't tie up to them." And in general, it seemed like they were like kind of supportive of like, yeah, like, come hang around them, just like don't touch them.
And they are supportive, and they have to be, because this is a collaborative process in which the public is engaged, and they need as many of the stakeholders and stakeholder groups on their side as they can get.
They should set up some bait and tackle shops out there on those things.
I want that. Yeah.
So a floating barge of bait.
So I could get on board. Like from the access point, that's a compromise I could see. Fish where you want, don't touch it. Seems fair. If it winds up being like, don't go near it, you can't be within 200 yards of it, I feel like that's going to cause a lot of tension.
I don't think we're going to see that.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of a tackle shop out there. I was thinking on Sunday when I was fishing underneath them that I was putting tags on fish.
Oh, okay.
We're asking for, so, with tagging studies, sometimes you ask the angling public to participate in some way, either call the tag in or release the fish. In this case, we're asking people to release the animals. I was thinking it'd be great to get the developer to let us put a big billboard up there, a big sign that says, hey, if you catch a fish looks like this, got a red streamer tag on it and a little electronic transmitter hanging off of it. Would you please do us the favor of tossing that one back?
Got it.
So is there a big gripe from the commercial fishery here? Like we're haven't gotten nearly as contentious as with putting this stuff in good bird habitat, buck habitat. So like we got to get back to the fight here. Where's the negatives?
It's been all positive so far.
On this one, I want to throw
poor ocean.
I want to return again to my the oil development in the Gulf.
Yep.
The shrimpers didn't like them things.
No.
Different critter. Just the amount of debris. They're after something totally different. Shrimp don't care about the rigs. It's all that much more debris. It's more stuff you got to avoid.
Yep.
So like winners, losers. Red snapper dudes, winners. Shrimpers, losers.
And there's an important parallel in the Atlantic too. You're right that there are commercial sectors of the fishing industry that aren't enthusiastic about some of these wind farms, especially the towed gear, trawlers, scallops, clams,
fish, like bottom trawlers.
Yep, and they're trawling for invertebrates, for bivalves. They're not enthusiastic.
When that's not I don't want to cast judgment, but that's not always the friendliest.
The ones that I know are great guys.
I don't mean friendly like not great guys. I just mean it's like
you mean from a bycatch.
People friendly
they
to
get
the ocean.
they catch it. They
indiscriminate.
If you go talk to an angler who's having a bad day of fishing and go like, "What do you think is the main reason you're having a bad day of fishing?" He might say, "Bottom trawlers."
Well, okay. This is a
that.
discussion for another time.
Okay. I mean, just talk about how people blame their bad day of fishing on stuff. Sure.
Yeah. And I just said it's a discussion for another time, but I'll say one thing on it, which is that for some species of finfish, the recreational sector is responsible for the majority of the mortality, not the commercial sector.
They don't want to hear about that.
It's not what we're talking about here, because we're talking about trawlers who are potentially upset about wind farms.
Yeah.
And on that topic, they may have a case. And to that end, developers are offering, let me think about how to phrase this. The developers that are at that stage now are offering compensatory mitigation to commercial fishermen who can demonstrate certain criteria.
Mm-hmm.
For example, within time frame A to B, I drew X revenue from the area that's within your lease.
I'm going to pay you not to fish.
Exactly. Well, going to pay you because you can no longer fish here, but you can continue fishing elsewhere. So there's actually a financial opportunity here for these people because they can draw two revenues, one from their usual job, and then they can cash the check from where they used to fish. It's more complex than that on an individual basis, but in any case, there is mitigation involved for the commercial angler, the commercial fishermen who are
Yeah. I mean, we can assume two ways, right? It's pretty easy to prove you're a bad fisherman.
Well, one other thing to mention is that just like with on-land renewable development, the siting of offshore wind is an iterative process that takes into account things like where people are fishing.
Okay.
We're always looking for the lowest impact. We're always looking to put the energy infrastructure in the places where we weren't using that location for a whole lot of other stuff.
When it comes down to onshore wind development, you're looking for these places that are, these high wind plateaus or whatever, right? There's a micro site selection.
Yeah, there's a resource and you want to extract
You'd
it.
be like, you can't just put one anywhere. You want one that has like very consistent windy spots, right kind of areas to develop. It can't have like huge topographical features, right?
Right.
So is the Atlantic coast, does it have all these sort of micro wind channels, or does it wind up being a sort of more ubiquitous constant wind no matter where you go?
It's in between that.
Okay.
I don't think it's as micro as on land where you have topography.
Mm-hmm.
Ain't much topography 27 miles from shore. But you do have areas that are windier than others, consistently windier than others. The New England, the Northeast is consistently windy. That's where a lot of offshore wind's going to wind up.
But we're talking about sort of large, you have large areas that are consistently windy, not like little teeny pockets that are consistently windy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And when you get that far from shore, that's right.
Let's talk about winners and losers.
All right.
From a species standpoint.
Yeah. Humans, winners.
Yeah. What's your guess on I don't know, right whales, swordfish, like whatever, like who's going to think?
Birds are a big part of the conversation.
Who's going to think this sucks?
I'll address Cal's comment about birds. So it's hard to avoid migratory pathways when migratory pathways run through the Atlantic. A lot of these wind farms are likely to be in places that historically have been migratory pathways for some species. So I want to just real quick talk about this study that my colleagues at TNC Virginia are doing, where they're putting satellite altimeter tags on a couple species of shorebirds. Altimeter meaning we get the altitude of the animal in addition to the lat long.
That's interesting.
And it's super.
Yeah, it's three-dimensional, right?
It's three-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's critical to know that information, because you could say, oh, well, 50% of the whimbrels that we tagged went right through this wind farm area, and think that, hey, maybe we need to not build it there because this is critical for the migratory pathway. But without knowing how far off the surface of the ocean those animals are relative to where those turbines are, what does that mean?
I could see that. That's not something that would have occurred to me, but yeah.
And so nailing down, again, it's about building that foundation of scientific knowledge such that we can reduce the impacts as much as possible to all species, including birds.
Give me a couple species that are out 20-some miles off cruising through.
Fish species.
No, birds. Give me a couple birds.
Oh, man. Gannets, murres, razorbills, depending on the time of year.
Okay.
A lot of, shearwaters, things like that.
Got it.
I'm less of a birder than I am a fisherman.
Understood.
Sort of armchair ornithologist.
You know why? I'll tell you a little something about shearwaters. I don't know if you're much into etymology.
Okay.
He's shearing the water. I can tell you where he's at.
That's right.
He's licking it.
Yep. So, there's a lot of birds out there, a lot of different species, and some may be winners. In fact, there's speculation that the habitat created by offshore wind turbines will create good forage for birds that eat fish.
Got it.
And invertebrates.
Yeah.
Same is true of some marine mammals. Some marine mammals, harbor seals, gray seals in the North Sea, I think I have those species right, have started feeding around wind platforms. They go right to them.
Got it. Because you got all that activity.
Mm-hmm.
That little food chain in there.
It's an oasis.
Yeah. Well, so what about? Oh, go ahead, Brody.
No, I didn't have any.
What about whales?
I was the one
that was you.
That drew in a breath of air to ask a question. Did they ever talk about, like you're talking about to prevent the scouring effect? Like you do this thing, it creates some habitat. Like, is there someone else going like, oh, well, here's 10 other things that you guys could also do. And it might not even be beneficial to the turbine, but it's going to be really beneficial to all these things that swim around here.
I like where you're going with that.
Totally.
Like, hey, while you're out there.
Yeah. So there's a process where, from an impact standpoint, the first thing you want to do is avoid. Then you want to minimize. Then you want to mitigate, right? And so that hierarchy is coming into play with all of these construction projects. There may be mitigation that these developers can partake in that would result in things like fishing opportunities. It might be scour protection enhancement, or it might be something that's off-site from the wind farm, but that they pay for, like oyster reef restoration or other habitat restoration, still in the marine or estuarine environment and close-ish to where the wind farm
like
is.
An offset program.
Exactly, but not necessarily at the wind farm.
Have they kicked around sheathing those suckers in something that's real good for bivalves to hang on to? Or don't they want bivalve growth on it?
Yeah, like the drag or something.
Yeah, I don't think they want a lot of bivalve growth on it. I think, that can actually destabilize the structure. The amount of biomass you're talking about could destabilize the structure. So I think they're actually cleaning bivalves off of certain parts of these things.
Can I tell you something about the oil rigs? I just can't help but bring this back around to oil rigs.
Come on.
Those old oil rigs are encased in life.
Yeah.
When you put your hand on them, you can just sit there and break away. And it's like barnacles, but all these vacated barnacles that are full of little fish. And you can actually sit there and crumble some of that stuff and watch fish coming up from the depth. They just see it coming down. And they're so used to just chunks of this stuff breaking off.
Yeah.
They're coming up to meet it.
Use that as a little bait for your spearfishing exercise.
They're encased in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that'll happen if you leave something in the ocean for a while.
So if these wind turbine guys are listening.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like? You fished under one now. I mean, that's obviously a very big part of the whole contentiousness of this whole thing, right? Is what it looks like from shore. So I'd like you to speak to that. Like, the distance they put them out and how that's been worked on. But then when you're out there, I mean, obviously, like one memory that I have now that my father-in-law has for years wanted us to go and do, he's like, you'll never experience a sunrise like the sunrise you experience when you're 50 miles offshore.
Yep.
And he's right. Like when that sun breaks that horizon and there's just ocean around you, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
If you're in the middle or near a wind farm, it's not the same.
I'm sure that's the case. I haven't experienced a sunrise on the seas underneath a wind farm. I've experienced it many times elsewhere.
Sure.
I would suspect that.
But you get my point.
I do get your point. Yeah,
there's an aesthetic. There's nothing uglier than a wind farm.
Oil rig.
There's a
building, I guess.
There's an aesthetic loss of that. It's that sunrise observation.
That's part of why they want to put them way out, right?
That's part of it. The whole
Because people don't, so you don't have the NIMBY.
Yeah, because
Not in
if
my
you built
backyard.
those things a mile offshore of Montauk, like
you'd hear about it. You'd hear
go to
about it.
Nantucket and be like, oh no, we're going to put them right offshore in Nantucket.
Yep.
You'll see how many people also aren't pro alternative energy.
But you can see them from shore.
You can.
You can, but they're not big. So
27 miles out?
and they're big structures.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but you got the curvature of the Earth. Well, it depends who you ask.
That's depends who you ask.
So at what distance are they visible, not visible?
You can see them from shore, from 27 miles, but they're small and there's not much to them. And if they weren't moving, you would need a crystal clear day to even really notice.
Do you have to look for them to find them, or you're like very aware?
You'd have to look for them for sure. In fact, we took our first tagging trip for this project a couple of weeks ago, and the guy that I had volunteering to help me tag fish, he and I were in the hotel room in Virginia Beach. It was a fairly high floor, and we stood at the window, and I said, "Oh, I see him," and it took him a minute. He's like, "Where, man? Where?" So, so what I would say is, this might sound a little cynical, but if you want to observe a sunrise on the ocean near a wind farm, just anchor up east of the wind farm and then watch the sunrise, you know, that direction.
That statement's not going to go over well with a lot of people.
No, I mean,
but when you're out there fishing underneath the wind farm, like what, after a day, you're like, oh, it's just normal to have this big blade spinning above my head.
Yeah, after the first couple fish, you've forgotten about it.
How loud is it?
Can't hear it really. You might hear the wind rushing around the, over the blades.
Like
but,
anything, yeah.
Yeah.
What about whales? Whales loving it or hating it?
I haven't asked the whales. How deep you want to get into this?
To the bottom.
Whew, you got the wrong guy.
Okay, surface level whale.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say all. You remember earlier I said that I'm primarily interested in one thing. I'm primarily interested in anything that would pass. Okay, let me put it this way. My primary interest when it comes to conservation is sacrificing the least amount of acres of productive wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my primary. Like I would be like, my primary objective is saving productive wildlife habitat, whether it's a cattle ranch, whether it's a brushy ditch.
I'm with you.
Okay, if my whole thing was like, I'm a whale guy, top to bottom, all I care about is whales, would I be like real sweating it about these wind farms?
I don't think so. It's been in the news a lot that allegedly offshore wind development is harming marine mammals.
Okay.
We're experiencing an unusual mortality event for whales on the East Coast.
Is it right whales or what is it happening to?
The North Atlantic right whale is an endangered species. There are something like 350 animals left in existence. Humpback whales have also experienced unusual levels of mortality over the past 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely difficult to pin down the cause of mortality for a whale. One reason is you usually don't observe the whale until several days at least after it's perished.
Okay.
When they wash up dead, they probably expired many miles from the beach in various states of decomposition by the time they hit shore.
Okay.
A necropsy is performed on every stranded marine mammal where it's possible to do so, and that includes North Atlantic right whales. It includes humpback whales, in pursuit of clues to what might have caused the death of the animal. The majority of these animals bear signs of vessel strikes. Some of them bear signs of recent vessel strikes, and it could be blunt force trauma, it could be propeller marks, it could be broken bones from blunt force trauma. But good luck determining what vessel hit that whale because of time and space. So,
okay. And how long is this going back for?
The unusual mortality event was declared in 2017. It started in 2016. But there's no evidence that any offshore wind development.
It was Trump. That was the year.
killed my soundbite. There's no evidence that any offshore wind development has resulted in the death of even a single whale.
Okay, but I mean, you asked me how deep we want to go. We don't need to go terribly deep, but was there like a significant increase in offshore wind development in 2016?
Well, remember at the beginning of this part of the conversation, I told you there's only 24 turbines in the ocean and half of them were just built. So in 2016, there were zero.
Okay.
There was survey activity going on at the time, and it has been claimed that some of these survey boats, the survey gear, could have disrupted or disturbed these whales in some way.
Got it.
Are
they doing seismic surveys?
They're doing surveys with gear that is far quieter and a much higher frequency than the seismic surveys that are done for oil and gas. So this geotechnical and geophysical survey gear, most of it is actually outside the range of hearing of these whales.
But blunt force trauma, you're talking about they're physically getting banged up.
Yep.
Okay.
Boats are hitting them.
So it's not, no one's speculating that it's the noise of the seismic survey that's...
It's being speculated, and I don't want to add any fuel to this fire. It's being speculated that the survey noise could have disrupted the normal activities of the whales.
Understood.
That then eventually resulted in
put them in different channels, like commercial channels that they typically would steer clear from or something.
Right. And so a couple more things on the vessel strikes and offshore wind. Every offshore wind construction vessel and survey vessel is required, and they do, carry protected species observers, trained individuals who are looking for whales, dolphins, sea turtles, any protected species. All of those that I just mentioned are obligate air breathers. They got to come to the surface. If and when a protected species observer sees a marine mammal, they have the authority to shut down the operation of that vessel, whether it's the survey gear, whether it's the engine, whether it's all the above, or divert course, or pull it way back to neutral, or whatever. Most vessels that are transiting or fishing or doing anything in the ocean do not have protected species observers on board. The argument could therefore be made that offshore wind vessels are less likely to strike marine mammals because of the presence of these trained individuals who are looking for protected species with the express purpose of reducing negative interactions with vessels.
While you're thinking, how much wind does it take to spin a turbine? Gosh, I don't know why you got that in my head now.
10 miles an hour will take that turbine right off the top of your head.
I hear it both ways all the time. They stop spinning below about 5 miles an hour. They could spin at that, but there's a brake that stops them from spinning because it's a net loss of electricity to spin the blades at that low level. They also shut down, I think, above 55 or 60. They just start spinning too fast, and that's not going to work.
My kids like YouTube compilations of wind turbines falling apart
and exploding.
It's very popular.
Yeah.
Very, very popular.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you a really complicated question.
I'm ready.
And you might have to do one of those things where you defer to your colleagues.
Okay. I'm ready for that too.
In discussing the border wall.
Oh, God.
To return to Trump. In discussing the border wall, I would often bring up, okay, one, I believe we have a border crisis. The border wall makes me uneasy because of the wildlife impact. Okay. Mountain lions, jaguars, mule deer, antelope, whatever. That if you make an impenetrable barrier, basically separating, cutting the bottom third of our continent off, and you make an impenetrable land barrier, isolating our portion of the continent from the rest of North America, Central America, South America from travel, and you look at the long, deep history of wildlife movements, as well as the short history of the need for wildlife to move around, I get uneasy. People then go, well, your job hasn't been taken by an immigrant. Okay? I'm like, be that as it may, this is a thing to think about. Okay? It's a thing to think about. The same way, if I said, we're going to go on family vacation, and someone said, but that costs a lot of money, I would say, correct. That's a thing to think about. In considering this, though, we're going to go on family vacation, recognizing that it costs money. Okay? With whales, are you so confident in our need to do this that you would say, I get it. It sucks for whales, but we need to do this anyways? Are you there?
In our need to build offshore wind?
Yeah. Would you be like, yeah, you know what? It's just like how we're blocking off jaguars. Like in pursuit of border security, we're going to kind of say goodbye jaguars in our country. Would you be like, would anybody say in pursuit of alternative energy, goodbye northern right whale?
I believe that the people who are best suited to answer that question No, you don't think you think you know where I'm going with this, but you don't, are the ones who are involved in that decision-making process.
Uh-huh.
They are the scientists, the marine mammal scientists who have dedicated their careers to understanding the biology of these animals. They're the people who are doing Marine Mammal Protection Act consultations for the environmental impact statements for these projects. And if they thought the answer was no, if they thought the answer was building out offshore wind is going to drive a species to extinction, they would not play ball.
You don't think so?
No. These people, these people are
counter that with how many species are going to go extinct. If we change the climate faster than wildlife can adapt to it, how many species are going to go extinct anyways?
There's a value judgment that is made when you're making that statement on which species are more important than others. That part of this process of the build out of renewable energy is consulting with the people who are best qualified to make those determinations.
Mm-hmm.
And those determinations are being made. And it has been determined that the build out of renewable energy is unlikely to drive these animals to extinction.
Got it.
So that's where we are.
Is the ESA, the Environmental or Endangered Species Act, is the Endangered Species Act, that's got to be powerful enough and applicable to federal waters, right?
Definitely. As is the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which they go hand in hand.
Got it. So, if there was like a real demonstrable risk of extirpation or extinction,
yeah, or
you
even
would have it would have got shut down,
or even the loss of a single animal in the case of the North Atlantic right whale. If it was suspected that any of these activities would result in the loss of even a single animal, it would have been shut down.
And when it comes to
go ahead.
Like when it comes to the ESA, I think everyone's aware like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sort of manages it and oversees it, but the other party is NOAA Fisheries, right? Like they're the ones who decide on all the ocean stuff, so they are like directly overseeing that. Probably more equipped to make calls on that than maybe the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is on terrestrial things, even.
Definitely. The Protected Species Division of NOAA Fisheries are the ones who make those determinations. And again, these are dedicated people.
Mm-hmm.
They've dedicated their careers, their lives to understanding the biology of these animals to the extent of the science, and that horizons are growing, being pushed every day on the extent of marine mammal science. And they're the ones making the calls. They're the right people to make the call.
They could have a built-in bias. You know what I'm saying? Like, hear me out.
That they love whales?
This is going to put you in a bad situation. No. Picture this. I wonder. This is like psychology. This ain't science. I wonder if you task those same individuals. Let's say you had an alternate universe, and you task those exact same individuals with determining whether an oil development was appropriate in this area. I wonder what answer those exact same individuals would have given you.
But there has been offshore oil development, and that people who administer the Marine Mammal Protection Act were involved in all of that too.
Well, touche.
Your little alternate universe exists.
To weigh into this like I shouldn't. I think there's so many people that want to point to this particular project and be like, that's what's killing the whales. Don't look at what's going on over here. That's what's killing the whales.
Which people are those?
There is some nasty shit going into the oceans at increasingly large amounts every single day. And when we're doing these necropsies on all sorts of marine wildlife, like you're pulling out pounds and pounds of shit.
Garbage.
Plastic. Yeah, and some of that is a societal shift.
So Mountain Dew is like, listen, it's not us. I shouldn't point out Mountain Dew. The plastic bottle companies.
But I mean, that's just like a small layer of things, right? But I think we've learned over and over again in the conservation world. Like, it is so rare to point to one thing and be like, oh, that one thing is the thing that did it.
But it's also interesting that like for the longest time, like pointing the finger at fossil fuel, whether it's from the ESA or just pollution in general or whatever, like that was like just the way things were. But now you have this environmentally friendly energy source that's having to contend with the same detractors that.
Yeah, you know how in every kid's movie, it's Big Oil's the bad guy?
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a new?
I don't know that. Give me an example. I don't watch kids movies.
There's
the forest one, the
Avatar.
Avatar.
That's Big Oil.
Basically,
my kids were watching one recently. It's about a guy that's a big. There's like a Bigfoot, a guy that like he's a scientist and he gets turned into a Bigfoot.
What's Oil's relation?
I think I missed that one.
He goes up to Alaska to fight Big Oil.
Oh, okay.
Big Oil is a very common villain in kids movies. I'm wondering if there would be a future Pixar or whatever Disney movies in which Big Wind is Big Wind is the villain. You know, because Big Oil has served as like, you know, like Kurt Vonnegut. Was it Kurt Vonnegut? Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut said when the Third Reich designed their uniforms, it's like they knew they would always be the bad guys in movies. And like Big Oil has served as the global villain for decades. It's interesting to see if the whale community is after Big Wind. It's just a real shit.
Like environmentalists fighting environmentalists, and kind of.
I think you would find that the whale community may actually be at least somewhat the Big Oil community.
Mm-hmm. Whoa.
Like there's people that might not like where this is going.
They're whale decoys.
Well, look at the green whale decoys. I mean, ConocoPhillips does a hell of a lot for the old prairie chicken and the sage grouse, right?
Yeah.
And I think they're into some oil stuff.
Well, as they put, maybe I think I heard something about that.
Out of a different podcast.
Being that endangered species are bad for business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like an industry. I mean, if you're a long playing player in an industry, generally, endangered species become a headache. And so as much as you can head that off, that's smart money.
I think
to head off something that's going to wind up shutting your industry down, right?
This particular discussion, right, is like, are we going to be 50 years down the road and be like, Jesus, I wish we would put all that smart time, energy, money into nuclear energy at that point in time?
That's the last thing I want. There's two last things I want to ask about.
Right? It's like, should we have just gotten more efficient with this?
That's coming
100%.
back. There's a rush for that here. Federal government passed some.
Yeah. I 100% think that not 100%.
80.
90 plus. Think that I think we're missing the boat. I think we should be doubling down on nuclear, but I want to ask you a question. Can you tell me through the Nature Conservancy, what's your mandate? I know the Nature Conservancy's work through, remember I've been pounding on this idea of habitat protection?
Yeah, sure.
I know the Nature Conservancy as a major player in habitat protection and also a very even-keeled
other than me.
No, just organizationally.
Yeah.
Really good about access. Don't go out of your way to mess with hunters and fishermen, and like really focused on habitat.
that is us.
Yeah.
So our mission is to protect the lands and waters upon which all life depends.
Okay.
Lands and waters. We are primarily a land protection organization. Got 4,000 staff of 4,000 dedicated individuals globally. About 400 scientists, including myself. We work on virtually every ecosystem on the planet, and we work in the ocean. We have 125 million acres. We currently protect 125 million acres of land worldwide. In this country, we own 2 million acres. We have conservation easements on another 4 million acres. We've transferred ownership of 15 million acres.
That's the number I wanted to focus on, because just tell people what that means.
Transferred ownership of 15 million acres to agencies, federal and state agencies.
Meaning you're making public land. You guys manufacture public land.
We are making public land. And if Mike, round
of applause.
I've always loved you guys' mission. I should have gotten that up top.
I'm glad we
just end with it after you beat him up a little bit.
Well, I want to point out that you guys had on this podcast a colleague of mine named Nels Johnson, who lives here in Bozeman. Had dinner with him last night on episode 261. There's no such thing as a free lunch with renewable energy. Mm-hmm. Covered a lot of ground on that episode, including a deeper dive into what the Nature Conservancy is and what we do. So go ahead and dial that one.
What a plug. Wow.
Yeah,
usually we got to work that in, but here a guest comes.
No, I wish I would have started out with that.
That's okay.
And before we get into why, I want to just hear a sort of, not necessarily your take, but sort of someone who's focused on energy, like why not nuclear? But first, walk me through the steps of I guess we should have done this up top. How did your mandate get directed? How does your mandate get directed into sort of watching this project and making sure this project's done effectively?
Which project?
Your involvement in offshore wind.
Yeah. Okay. So let me head off the nuclear thing. I'm not equipped to address that. So you can bring Nels back on if you want to talk about the nuclear thing. Okay. He's a much better guy. So the Nature Conservancy is heavily involved in the build out of renewables in the United States and elsewhere. We recognize that offshore wind is an area where we can make a lot of gains in terms of the amount of electrons that are flowing into people's homes. Mm-hmm. We also recognize that just like any energy source, building out offshore wind does have ecological impacts, and that we want to be involved. We want to be at the table to help minimize those impacts on nature. To result in the best outcome for nature and people. And so I've worked for the Nature Conservancy for 2 years, a little over 2 years. I was involved in offshore wind from the day I started. I'm a fish guy, though. 7 years of grad school to study fish. So that's the angle from which I approach renewable energies and offshore wind in general. And I've mentioned a couple times this project I was working on last Sunday under the wind turbines off Virginia, tagging project. This is a project that's funded by the federal government, funded by NOAA Fisheries, aka funded by the taxpayers. So thanks everybody. And we have a couple goals with the project, but essentially we're looking to better understand the impacts of offshore wind construction activity on some species of economically important fish.
Okay.
And I'm happy to get more into that if we have time. But that's my involvement in offshore wind. I sit on a variety of advisory panels, research advisor for a couple of organizations that are consortiums of folks thinking about offshore wind, working on offshore wind. Some of them involve stakeholders. Some of them involve developers, fishermen, city council members from some coastal jurisdiction where they're going to bring power ashore, things like that. There's a lot of, what I like to say is we take a field to table approach at the Nature Conservancy. We're in the field, we're doing the science, but we're also at the table. We're at the policy making table. We're weighing in on things like the environmental impact statements. Mm-hmm. We're working behind the scenes to identify research needs, research priorities. Sometimes we're out there collecting data in pursuit of those research needs and priorities.
Who else got something?
I have a thing to add. The other week, the House and Senate released final 2024 fiscal spending bills, and appropriators allocated, this is from an article, appropriators allocated $50.25 billion to the Department of Energy, about $1.8 billion above the fiscal 2023 enacted level. And there is a ton more going to nuclear research and development. So it looks like it includes $1.69 billion for nuclear energy research and development, which is about $212 million more than where it is now.
That'll be the next show. Why not nuclear?
Why not nukes?
I'd listen.
I want to point out the biggest mistake I made this show is the easy layup of instead of Runde DMC, it's Runde TNC.
Ooh, I haven't heard that one yet.
Such a bummer.
When you said that, for some reason my kids have gotten real into cleaning their shoes, which is driving me insane.
What?
Cleaning their shoes?
Like
Even
polishing
Crocs.
them?
No, like they're like always washing their Crocs with a scrub brush.
It's the strangest
Like,
thing
how do you
I've
guys
ever
even
heard.
know about this? And I made a joke. It's like, you guys think you're like Run DMC? Because remember they had their whole thing. It was like those super white shoes. My wife's like, oh my God.
Why is it driving you nuts?
They have no idea what you're talking about, of course.
Where would a 9-year-old get the idea that he needs to clean his Crocs off? It blows my mind.
I don't know either. Do they do that to their sneakers?
I don't understand. When they come in from the field, aren't you like clean your shit?
No. They're like cleaning them.
Like with a Q-tip.
Not cleaning them off like mud.
Like shining
They
them
want to
up.
go to school with fresh looking sneaks.
No, not fresh sneaks. Fresh Crocs. It's insane.
Steve also declared this
That your
morning.
Crocs look new.
Steve also declared this morning in the parking lot that he doesn't like states who have too many license plates. He just offered that up, and
Like
that
Montana?
like Montana specifically. He said you can learn a lot about a state by what kind of license plate.
How many
program they
license
have.
plates? Yeah. I said there's an inverse correlation
My native
to the
state.
greatness of a state and how many license plates it offers.
My native state, Maryland, leads the nation in the number of license plate they offer.
Oh, we got to
Oh,
be like
really?
second.
Something
Yeah.
like 80. Something
Yeah, I
like
think
80
we
license
gotta
plate.
be.
Well,
We
I don't support that.
My last thing I have is we got to get to trivia. Everyone's running low on
Are
time.
you going to stay for trivia?
He is.
Yeah.
What are you going to throw him a bone about?
Oh, he don't need any bones. This dude's
No, this
smart.
guy-
He's one of the first guests who's ever asked, like, "Hey, are we gonna play trivia?" So yeah, I think he'll do well.
I appreciate you coming on. We were all over the place.
Yeah, it was great.
We were talking about tech. We were talking about theory, philosophy.
We didn't get to barotrauma, which
I know,
I was
you-
excited
we'll
to
get
talk
to
about.
barotrauma
Yeah,
some
that's
other
good.
time.
Maybe you can hit that for like 2 minutes in trivia.
We got 2 minutes?
No, we'll hit it in trivia.
Oh, in trivia, sure.
Oh yeah, can you intro with barotrauma?
We'll see what the schedule looks like.
Thanks for coming on. It was probably frustrating for you.
No, it's great. Happy to be here. Felt like a PhD defense all over again.
But I get it, man. I mean, it's like, yeah. In developing alternative energy, it's like everything's gonna be a little bit painful. It's just like where you can get the least amount of pain and the biggest amount of gain.
Well said.
You would love it, Steve, right? If you could just do a clean trade and just what we're already developing for fossil fuels, if we could just trade it out and do the wind.
And it'll be even more energy. And
Yeah.
great, let's stop talking about it.
And I just want to remind the public that it's important to be involved. There's a public comment period open right now, and you might bring something to the table that hasn't been said before, because one of my favorite quotes, a Mark Twain quote, I think, is a fresh set of eyes
Finds more beans.
finds more beans. Yeah. Need more eyes on this situation.
Catches more fish,
Speaking of which, we
too.
didn't sell the damn t-shirts out.
Well, you're supposed to be wearing it.
I know. If you want a sweet t-shirt,
okay, much to Spencer's chagrin.
T-shirt.
Like this is all very complicated. Is it still like warranted to just walk around going, "Hey, make sure you turn your lights off"?
Definitely.
For sure,
Definitely.
we're all complicit.
Dude, I
We're
do
all
that.
complicit.
I half my day at home is spent walking around turning lights off.
I do
And
the
don't-
rounds and shut them all off, and 5 minutes later, I come around, they're all back on again.
Turn your lights off and don't get balloons for your next birthday party. I see
listen.
balloons every time I go offshore. Every time.
You can't.
In Texas, holy cow.
You could go to the top of the highest mountain on earth, and there's probably a birthday balloon sitting there.
There's a lot of complaining about
balloon.
A lot of complaining about federal overreach, but I mean, I think there's room for more.
Banning balloons.
Oh yeah,
I'm all for it.
I would a broad scale balloon ban.
That's sea turtle bait right there.
Mm-hmm.
Except for who you're going to piss off?
The balloon lobby.
No, big buck whitetail hunters.
Big helium.
A lot of them will say that if you find a balloon in the woods, that tells you what the wind drafts are doing there, and that's where a big buck would like to bed.
You guys think
he can
too?
That's
to turn the machine off, Phil.
Yeah.
Turn the machine off.
Got a bobber in the water, toe stuck in the mud. It's a perfect day for sitting and soaking up the sun. Dad came up and asked me, maybe it's wishful thinking. He asked, son, are you getting any? I said, no, I'm just fishing. My boat just lost the anchor, but the breeze is blowing slow. So I'm just out here sitting, snagging some trees and getting stoned. Jug of rum and a can of worms in the sun creeping down the shore. Got a few hours to myself, that's what fishing's for. Sun creeping down the shore. Got a few hours to myself, that's what fishing's for. Well, maybe you're on the water, casting from the shore. Time just seems to fly by, leaving you wanting more. It always seems your last cast is really the first of many. Whether catching a fish or catching a buzz beats not catching any. Some folks, they don't understand or know just what they're missing. Cause you know that if they did, they'd be out here fishing. Jug of rum and a can of worms in the sun creeping down the shore. Got a few hours to myself, that's what fishing's for. Got a few hours to myself, that's what fishing's for.